But when I was asked to take over Little Flower Society, I was on the provincial council, and our provincial was a good friend of mine, and he really wanted me to do it. And I argued with him for 3 days. I was turning 50. I didn't want to spend my life fundraising, and I had a lot of different excuses that I said. And finally, the last day, for 3 days, we argued. So the last night, I said, Quinn, I don't even like her. And he looked at me and he said, learn to, and he walked out of the door. So I had to learn, and I did. I spent a lot of time with her. Because I read her in novitiate, and I thought she was a spoiled brat that needed a good shrink, to be honest with you. When you read her story and all that French Jansonism and stuff that's coming, it's awful. I mean, just so. And when you're 18, you're going to try to take on the world, and she's talking about letting it go and that stuff. Anyway, so when you at 50, it was amazing. So what I've learned about her is a lot of things, and there's many things I could talk about, but I'd like to maybe do it this way. I think why she's important to most people and why she still continues to be one of the great saints of modern time, and I'll quickly outframe her life, which is portrayed in that wood carving. That's the largest religious carving in North America, by the way. I think she made intimacy of God doable for all of us. She taught us that we all are supposed to be holy and can be holy by God's work, and that's, I think, the big thing. It made it real. A lot of stuff, remember some of the stuff, some of you were my age growing up, and it was all like an obstacle course to try to get God, and he was beyond you anyway, But somehow she made it real and practical. Her little way is about doing the ordinary things of life with great love, period. Not because of any need you have or any expectation you have, but simply love, which is being for the other, respecting it for what it is, but also giving yourself to it and giving it generously. And I think she made that, and that's what holiness is. A lot of people, we got to be on my knees and by the Blessed Sacrament or something. That helps, but that's not what it's about. We all think it's about piety, about what am I getting out of this? Is this going to get me to heaven? That's, I would say crap, but I taught boys for 20 years in high school, so my language got corrupted. Overexposure to teenage boys can really destroy you. But anyway, but I think that was, I think, her really big thing, and because she had a struggle with life. First of all, the one thing that's bothering me here, somebody gave me a cookie of her. I think it's scandalous to bite. It's $2, but it's bothering me here. But anyway, she grew up in a tough time. She's born in January 1st, 1873. Remember, France was in the middle of that whole Napoleonic revolution that started exploding. And it became very anti-clerical, because remember, the church, the clerical church, the hierarchical church, was the first estate. They sided with the monarchy, not with the people. So there was a real anti-clericalism going on, or anti-church stuff going on in France, having to do with it. It had to do with, we were on the wrong side, because somehow, the bishops and everybody was part of the monarchy, piece of it. And so that's one piece of it. Secondly, it was about in a time of Jansonism. Jansonism is a real disease. It's a heresy of the church, but it came up in the Middle Ages. I don't have time to get into this, but it's just the background. And heresy produces this God. Why are things going wrong in the world? God might be pissed off and angry. And you're never going to keep him happy anyway. That this God was such, remember the perfectionism of God? When the Hebrew word for, is be complete and whole as your Father is whole, we say perfect. None of us are perfect. In fact, God loves us, in our imperfection. And that's one thing she teaches. God loved her, not in spite of her imperfection, because she was imperfect. That's the crack where the light gets in. And we forget that sometimes. And I think she dealt with that incredibly in her own life. And remember, we would have never known if it weren't for a nun making a catechism what they're going to say about her. She's too simple. Because they really thought she was simple. And plus, she was a spoiled brat when she went through some of her time. But anyway, I want to get into that. But Jansonism was the prevailing thing. Everybody, God was angry, happy. You got to do this, you got to do that. Remember, as a child, she's writing how many indulgences, how she was getting, and how many good works she did. She was lists so that she could say, look what I did for you. By the end, she's saying, I come with empty hands. It didn't mean anything. It's all God's gift, So somehow that we always think it's about us. We turn spirituality to us. What am I getting out of this? As opposed to what am I giving? Listen to Jesus constantly. So I think she really breaks through. Before Faustina ever existed, she cut through God's unconditional love. Faustina has conditional love, really. The cleric's got a hold of her. Well, you'll get God's mercy if, go to confession, go to mass, that stuff. She did. It's pure. It's always and already present. God's mercy, God's presence is always and already present within us. It's a graced universe, which is what the incarnation is about. And that's you got to get. That's what Carmelite spirituality is about. This window explains that whole thing. And if you come back, I can do a 3-hour explanation, but that's a different issue. But it's about the holiness of the human experience, transformed by the incarnation of God in Christ. Okay. She's born on January 2nd. She's a Capricorn, like I am, and many of us, 1873. And there's a lot of wars going on. There's the Napoleonic Wars. There's the Prussian Wars. Some of you have studied history. So it's a wartime, and the world is somewhat at war, or Europe was somewhat at war at that point. And then you got this chance that she breaks through it. Now, she's the last of 9 children, of 2 parents who had a different vocation. Remember, her mom wore the pants in the family, Zélie. She's a very powerful woman. She did a lot of things, but she wanted to become a nun like her aunt did, a visitation nun. Of course, she got thrown out. She'd never be obedient to anybody, So she didn't get it. He was a watchmaker, a clockmaker, and a jeweler, and he went to become a monk in Switzerland, but he couldn't learn Latin. So both of them, the thing they thought they wanted to be in life didn't happen. And of course, somebody sets up a blind date in Alençon where they're living, and she, as she talks about it, she loved that she saw him and said, "I'm going to marry that man." He hadn't even met her, but she's a woman who runs it. If you ever want to get the great insight from the parents thing, there's a book called No Greater Love. It's the 246 letters of the parents. 8 of them are from him, and the rest of them are for her. And she's constantly doing this. She's constantly telling everybody, she's shaking her finger. God doesn't like it. See, she's a Jansenist. That's what Therese had to work through. That God isn't somebody angry with us. He's someone who loves us. He delights in us. And he's always present to us, that kind of thing. So, but she has to learn in a hard way. So she's the one of 9 children, 5 of the kids. 4 of them died young, the 2 boys had enough sense to get out of there before they died in infancy. And one of them lived to be 4 or 5. And in fact, Zélie was pregnant with Therese while she lost the older one. It's one thing to lose a baby that 3 months because you haven't gotten to know him, but to bring up a child. And so I think it's Melanie Therese or whatever, and I can't even think of her name right now. But anyway, and so she's born in trauma, and the mom's in trauma again. Is she going to lose another one? So she's born, and she seems intelligent and stuff. Gets there, she gets baptized in the 4th, and then but the mom had breast cancer. She had gone to Lourdes. Remember, Lourdes is only 24 years before, or 22 years before Therese is born. And so she goes to Lourdes, that's big, and she doesn't get cured. Another thing. So the baby's getting sick because it couldn't be, breastfed, and that's what they did. They didn't have all the formula we have these days, I guess. So the mother, in the middle of March, later March, she runs all the way out to where a wet Noucheriers, Rose Taillé, went out there with the baby in the middle of the night, went 7 kilometers, and gave her to Rose Taillé. And she's going to be there for the next 14 or 15 months. She's going to fall in love with the farm and these big-breasted farm women, And she loves it. And she only came into the town on Thursdays. They come in for provisions. That's where she met her own family. And even the mom would say she's more comfortable with those bumpkins than us. Of course, they were a little more upper class, So it was an interesting thing she had to learn. But I think, anyway, then they bring her back, and about 17 months later, her mom dies. Now, what you start affecting in her, and I think it's an issue about how God comes to us where we need, not where we want sometimes. Because what happens is, I think as a baby, you can smell your mother, you were in the womb. So she's taken away early on, couldn't probably articulate it. She's out there with this farm family and Rose Taillé, And she loves the farm out there. I'm shutting this off because it just went off. And so then she comes back and then falls in love with her real mother, her biological mother. Her mother dies. Rose is gone. And then what she does at the funeral, and you can see over there, she grabs, see, there's now the two girls. Leonie kept going in and out. Leonie was a little different. She's the middle girl of the five. But Celine adopted Marie, the oldest girl. And so she naturally goes to Pauline and says, you'll be my mother. So the real mother in her life is Pauline, because she teaches her discipline. It's not about you. Because you remember, she needed to be noticed all the time. I mean, she was such a center of attention. She's a narcissist. And her dad's calling her the little queen. That's the worst thing she needed to hear. When you already know you're the queen of the earth, just somebody else bowing before it goes crazy. So, okay, So she had to kind of learn that. But so she got Pauline. Pauline is the one that disciplines her, brings her boundaries in life and respecting other people, and really challenged her in a way. She was probably the most challenging mother. But there was always the question, are you going to leave me? Are you going to leave me? And Pauline keeps saying, no, I'll never leave you. We'll always be together. Be careful what you promise. Because Pauline then starts talking, I'm going to become a nun. Pauline. So they do. And so in October, what happens is they're getting it ready. And they're going to send the two girls, Celine and Therese, to the Abbey School, the Benedictine Abbey School. So they had this big dinner one night. They go to Mass in the morning. They take the two girls to the Abbey School. Pauline goes that way. Now, Pauline was her confidant. I mean, she trusted her like her mother. And when she comes home, of course, she wants to tell Pauline, where's Pauline? Well, she became a nun. Yeah? Well, she doesn't live here anymore. What? And it begins this 9 months of a hissy fit, nervous breakdown. She gets awful, and she writes about that. If you read her story of the soul, she writes about that. I don't want you, I want her. Do you ever get obsessed with somebody and something? And that's all you want, and that's all you need, and you grab onto it, and nobody else can even help you. When she goes through that, it's awful. And remember, psychology hadn't happened. She's a peer of Freud, at the same time. So this whole business of psychological insight, nobody had. So she had to learn from that, but she went through this 9 months of absolute being needy, angry, hurt. They thought she was going to die. She was breaking out in hives, but didn't want anybody, anything. And, they didn't know what to do. And, and they were all helpless, and they said she was going to die. But what they prayed to, though, is they had a statue of what the French would call Mary Victorious. It's Our Lady of Grace, the lady who made it. So it's the mom's family, the Guérens, she had that statue. So they had it there in the room with her, and they're always praying to her. That's kind of the latest hot version of Mary, And so they're praying, and on Pentecost Sunday, which is May 14th. Now this is from October. This started. They're praying for her, and she looks up and she sees the statue smiling. Now statues don't smile. But her experience was true. And she feels like she's healed. Now, once before I had an example. They're saying, are you sure? You're sure. She gets out of bed, and suddenly she's back to the old good Therese we knew. And okay. So what's interesting there is how you have to trust. See, mysticism is about trusting your experiences of God. God is always intervening in our lives and speaking in our lives and doing things in our lives. But most of us don't trust it, know it, or believe in it. We dismiss it as some crazy intuition or something. No, it's real. The trust when it's God working, and she somehow knew it. But here's the issue. They took her up to the Carmel. Remember, she'd been going up there, and they watched her screaming and yelling, when Pauline didn't pay attention to her when she was behind the screen and all that stuff. So they go up there, and all the nuns who have heard her screaming for 9 months on the Thursdays when they had visitation, they bring her up there, and Pauline says, what's happening? What happened? She smiled at me. Who? The statue. Really? Of course, two of the nuns want to intervene. And one says very clearly, they want to help because they listen to this girl. And says, well, did she have the blue sash like Mary's got one outfit? She always has a blue sash like Our Lady of Lourdes does. And she said, I don't know. All I know is she smiled at me. So the other nun gets worse. Well, did she have her gold shoes on? Our Lady of Lourdes always has golden shoes on. And she said, I don't know. All I know is she smiled at me. So Pauline said, are you sure you've been hallucinating before? So what she had to learn to do, and that's where she's a mystic, she had to learn to trust that it was true, not dismiss it. Her first mystical experience, and if you look back up there, the third one on the top, the second over, and I want to go back on that because I think it's a real part of what her spirituality is about. See that he's fishing, and then you see the flowers? Okay. She gets bored with the fishing because, they've moved to Lisieux by then because the mom's brother, Isidore, is in Lisieux, and he's got help with the family and the girls and stuff. Okay. But she's walking around, and this is an interesting piece for her. She's about 8 years old. She's looking around, and she sees this beautiful flower. She goes off the beaten path. She's just bored with him fishing. So she goes wandering around. She goes and says, oh, my God, there's this beautiful flower. Now, remember, her greatest need was to be noticed and valued. She had to be noticed. Remember when she was as a kid, her mama writes, when every time she had to go upstairs, because she's an Enneagram 4, they're special, and they think everybody else is special, but they're really special. So they have to be noticed. So whenever she had to go to bed, she'd say, Therese, go back upstairs, say your prayers, and go to bed. And so she'd go to the first door, if you've been in Alan's son house, and she'd say, Mama, Mama. And if Mama didn't say anything, she stayed there. So she'd say, yes, Therese. Then she'd go to the next step. Mama, Mama, all the way upstairs and all the way down. Every entrance and exit. Her value came from being noticed. You always got to find out, what do you need that breaks through to you? And anyway, so that's her piece. So she's looking at this flower, though. And this is her 8 years old, like young Michael is. You saw me with young Michael. He's 8. And she's looking at it, and what a waste. So she's looking at it, and then she's thinking, well, maybe if I cut it and bring it so somebody can enjoy it. When you perceive the value comes from being noticed or seen, you can see what's operating. So, but she's sitting there with it. Nature is the first revelation of God, and we forget that sometimes. We always think it has to be in church somewhere. The cathedral that God built for us is the creation around us and beauty and nature. And so she has enough sense to sit with it. And suddenly it hits her that it gives glory to God by being, not by being seen. See, it's not about what we do. It's about who we are. We think of you say, what do you mean to be Catholic? Well, I do this, we don't do this, No, it's about being the beloved of God, believing that God always, what God sees is us as his beloved. God who always and everywhere dwells in us. And that's the trust, that's the whole thing. And so then it comes down later, and that healing. So she had to trust that smile was true. Even if everybody said, it didn't smile, it's still there, it's concrete or marble, whatever it was. So to learn to trust, and with those 2 nuns, and Pauline saying, are you sure? So she had to trust without the confirmation and the affirmation. We all have to do that. How do you listen to God, and how do you trust the divine instincts inside you? That's what mysticism truly is, and that's where she's really a gift. She's a mystic early on in her life. And then there's a lot of other things that happen, but that's probably the most significant thing in her life, is that healing of Our Lady of the Smile. Because what happens? It's the divine feminine. We have a church that only has a masculine God, We all God male images. And suddenly it's the divine feminine healing her. Because what was her wound? A mother abandonment wound. God will always come to us where our need is. And her need was this. That was the huge wound of her life. And that's huge. And so that her whole life becomes that. There's a lot of different things. And then, of course, the next one is, you see up there, there's a series that, there's scrupulosity that was in the middle of it, because they were taught to be, you got to do everything right, and stuff. So she got healed of that, and by a lot of different things. But then the best one is her Christmas Eve, when she's 12, going to be 13. The dad had donated the altar at the cathedral, so they had front seats in the church. The basilica is still there, and so they had front seats. Remember, the altar was facing that way. and there are front seats there. But before it, there's a big, behind the side there, and it's still there, where the manger scene was. So she went to the baby Jesus and says, I want to be wholehearted for you. Remember, she wanted it all. I'm not going to do half-assed things, nothing half-hearted. So she asks him for that. Because then they go to the Mass. Then they go home for the dinner. Well, remember, she's always hypersensitive, though. She has to struggle with that all. So when they're walking in the door, the fireplace is right there in the bassinet. And she says, oh, I can't wait to see what I'm going to get. And her dad, who is now frustrated with all this, says, I hope it's the last year. When's she going to grow up? When do you find out there's no Santa Claus? It's about what you give, not what you get. And she has one of her hissy fits again. And she starts running upstairs. And what's important there is, and Celine's looking at her, because the maids and servants had made this huge Christmas dinner. And she had ruined many a dinner before. You've all had people in the family do that. Well, she was doing that again. So Celine's looking and watching. Well, she starts running upstairs. And she has this incredible experience. It's not an apparition, but remember, be careful what you ask for. She had just prayed to the baby Jesus at the cathedral. I want to be wholehearted for you, all for you. And she goes up and she hears him. It's more of an intuition of an audio kind of apparition within her. It basically, here it says, Therese, get over yourself. It's not about you. I don't know how to say that in French. But that's what all conversion is about. When the other piece is about that is, we only know later that that's halfway through her life. Most of us, that's what this window, most of us wake up in the second half of life. The first half of life, you're building your castle, your kingdom, how you fit in. And then it begins to come apart here, and that's what this window is about, the dark nights. And then suddenly this wake-up call, oh my God, it was all God. But she learned that, and she always say, and she felt charity breathe my soul. Because you heard him say, it's not about you. All conversion is not about, and yet we're in a society that glorifies you, isn't it? What am I getting out of this? I'm angry. Election didn't turn out the way I wanted. All this crap we do. And we glorify it, grievances. But it was like, and she lived that way. It was a marvelous experience. And then trying to get up, there's a whole thing you do with her life. But she had a little way. She always had a simplicity to her. A lot of the nuns thought she was way too simple. The reason we have the book, The Story of the Soul, was one of the nuns made a comment at the end. When she was walking in, the TB was around. 4 nuns died of that. They called it consumption in those days. And she was looking bad in that point. And she, so one of them said, oh, look at her. Look at Sister Therese. What are we going to say about her? She's so simple. That catty comment. On Tuesday nights for 7 to 8, they have community recreation. And so, well, what happened was her cousin had been there and overheard her. So she goes to Pauline, who's now the prioress, and says, you know what they're saying about her? That, what are we going to say about her when she dies? She's too simple. So Pauline says, I'll write. But see, it was a catty comment that was made. And somebody heard it, and somebody dealt with it, as the readings, I think, talked about. And so she, but Pauline said, why don't you write? You're really good. Remember, she was an artist. I mean, she was not a great artist, but she was a writer. She wrote all those plays. She wrote songs. She did all that stuff. So why don't you write up? You're a good storyteller. She was a mimic. They used to love, she knew how to mimic people, they loved her when it was a community recreation because she get them laughing. These were very serious nuns. Some of them should have been institutionalized, actually. But no, they're really true. I'm not being flippant about it, but that life can crush you as well as inspire you. So anyway, Pauline says, look, why don't you write? You're really good. Why don't you start writing? And she says, no, I can't do it. Why? Because it's not about me. You're telling me to write my life story. So Pauline waits remember Pauline always was good in her life. So waits about another week and finally goes back and says, well, I'm not talking to you as your sister. I'm talking to you as your superior. I'm telling you under obedience. I want you to write down what's been going on in your life. And she said, well, I can't do that either. But I will write about the mercy of God. So if you ever look at the book, and so, when they took her to the infirmary, and I want to talk about it in a minute, they found these 3 books. Remember when we were in college, you had those blue books you had to write? Well, that's what it was. So they found these 3 manuscripts, A, B, and C. And of course, when they were taken to the infirmary when she was really bad, and one of the nuns, so Pauline just took them and threw them at her desk because she was losing her beloved sister, little sister. And it was only a month after she died that the nun said, "Whatever happened to those books?" We would have known nothing about her except for a catty comment, somebody reporting, and this whole thing went on. We go on. So that's a big thing. The other piece also is later, though, is when she gets really sick, she's living in the Carmel was not what she thought it was going to be. Like most of us, you get disillusioned, you go to marriage, you marry this prince and you find out he's still a toad, even when you keep kissing him. And you marry this beautiful princess and she turns out she can't cook and she gets fat. We all get disillusioned. Or Carmelite life was different. I thought it was one thing and it's something else. These people I have to live with. It sounded like a good idea, but now it's got people involved, and all that stuff. But we all get disillusioned, and that's what part of this is about, is how do you get through the dark nights of it all. But she had the same thing, but she had to learn to live with them. She took the name Therese of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. They had a holy face, which is a crying face of Christ, that you see him in the suffering of the world. It's not the Shroud of Turin. It's Tours, back there. And plus, she had this innocence. She did have an innocent spirituality. She, by the end, one of the great teachings of hers that we don't say enough about, she talks about the closer you get to God, the simpler life is. Most of us don't believe that, do we? Because it always looks like, remember, religion became an obstacle. Of course, you got to do this, you got to do that, and all that stuff, But she came to believe that, the simplicity of it, and it was wonderful. But anyway, they finally took her down there. And in July, about 3 weeks into it, they didn't have daily Mass and Eucharist, but the chaplain would come 3 times a week and they would bring her communion because she was in the infirmary, isolated because it was a very infectious disease. And so she spits it up one day, it's called, and he says, "Never again. We got to protect Jesus, from his people." And he says, "She's not getting any more." Now, she had at that point 16 months of feeling the absence of God. We all go through those dark times when there's times when God feels close and the divine is present. And there's other times where it's gone. I've gone through with some of the stuff I've been. He just seems so absent. Where did you go? So you start feeling the absence of the presence. And the last thing, the only sign she had that God was still with her, loved her, for her, was receiving communion. And it's gone. So that she hits the darkest of 16 months. She's going to die 2 months later. 16 months into that darkness, the last thing she had that God was reaching out is taken away from her. Now, she's very observant, but that's her greatest teaching at the end. And finally she says, "Well, it's a grace to receive the sacrament because then I know you're here. But it's a grace not to receive the sacrament because now my longing for you is even more." Instead of turning it down, collapsing in herself, is now because everything is grace. See, her great teaching, everything is grace. Not some things that God, and grace isn't a thing, grace is the presence of God, period. That God's presence. So we live in a grace universe. And that was her big thing. That's her greatest gift. Everything is grace. And so the challenge I think she always to us is, how do you accept life as it happens? I've accepted a lot of things in life that were fun, glorious. I've accepted some challenge. Having trouble accepting getting old. And with the pain going on, and saying, "Damn it, where are you when I need you?" You try to pray out of it. One thing she learned, and it's probably really a valuable thing that we all have to learn, is God protects you from nothing. We think God is our protector. What you learn is God protects you from nothing but sustains you through everything. You got to trust that divine presence within us. That's an important kind of key to her spirituality. But it's all about, and when she had to teach the novices, which some of them were scandalized, she taught them, stop saying all these, wording God to death. We talk God to death. We tell God how to be God as if we knew, don't we? Here's what you should be doing today. Here's somebody's hurting you. It's about how to be still and listen. That mystical experience. That flower taught her at 8 years old, without saying a word, that it gave glory to God by being. And so I think one of the things that she still teaches us, and as Carmelites we need to preach more. I write prayer books. You saw the one I wrote here. but is stop words. Listen. Silence. It feels like wasting time, doesn't it? Well, I can last 5 seconds, and I'm thinking what I should be doing because he's not going to do it anyway, or but that to sit still and listen to the silence, listen to this God who speaks in silence, and how to be present. And that's why her whole thing is about more attentive living. Do whatever you're doing, do it intentionally, be there, and do it with love. Don't second guess it. Don't try to ignore it. Don't try to overwhelm it. Embrace reality for what it is. Most people, we're still trying to live in a world that doesn't want to accept reality. And the faith reality is that we're God's beloved. Many of us think we're shamed, we're hurt, we're sinners, we're nothing, all this crap. And God couldn't love me. So I have to earn it. Back about me again, me earning it. Hers is total self-empty. I'm going to come with empty hands to God. When she would gather, she had bookloads of these, the stuff she had done, the intentions and the good works, So I think that's part of it, the simplicity, and it's about living real life. Living real life. Through the darkness and the light. Through the things that are exciting. That you can see this window here, it starts in green. The blue is God. But that's all full of hope, and then you see what happens here. I don't have time to go through it. Then you go through the dark night here when it's all gone. The things that you love don't energize you anymore. What happened? But how do you endure in faith? And how do you trust you're there? I'm going through, like I say, a dark time myself. And my prayer these days is simply, I know you like to play hidden and be absent. But today, would you just give me one sign that I can understand? It often doesn't happen. But at least I keep saying, I think you're here. I know you're here. Would you show yourself? See, it's more about presence. Like, well, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. You'll see the banner there. One of the things I was very happy that we did here, because a lot of the banner is prayer. Your intercessor. She does get she can help you a lot. She's incredibly helpful. She had God, her Father wrapped around her finger, and she felt that when she was going to heaven, she'd have God the Father wrapped around her finger. She knew that. And it works. But it's also, what's much more dealing with her is something we need or want for the world or for us. But I think the issue is, she said, I'm your sister, I'm your friend, I am always with you. See, the gift is the presence. You're not alone. You've all been with people dying, your loved ones, and being in the hospital. You feel helpless. There's nothing you can do. But just be there. You can't take away their pain, but you just be there with them. And that's who God is. I'm the one with you. And that's what she teaches us. That's who she is. Stop telling her, do this, do that. It's just, I'm with you. And you say, okay, Therese, help me. When she came yesterday, I went up there and I said, thank you for coming. Now tell God that I'm still here. But I think that's the thing. And so I think just a span of it, she's a great gift, and she was a great gift to the church, and she continues to be, because I think she's one of those people, it's about the unconditional love and mercy of God. There is no condition. Most churches and, religion, which is supposed to tie you to truth, I'm a little late. I'm going to end 1 minute. We somehow tie it to, well, you can't do it, but we'll get you there. So you got to go to a priest. Priests try to take it over. We're the elite. We'll get you to God. No, he's already there. You just have to awaken to what is. That's the great lesson of her. Awaken to what is. She had to deal with life on life's terms, not in her expectations of someone who needed to be noticed. And let go of that. And trust that he was there. And the last thing she says, having almost tried to commit suicide, remember she told them to take away the medicine because she knew she wanted to. The pain was incredible, and so she told them to take the medication away because she knew she was going to try to end it all. But the last thing she says after 18 months of absence, darkness, and longing is, "My God, I love you." Which says it all. We sang that at Mass today. So that's a kind of capsulation I'm going to do later. I'm going to break down pieces of that life, why she wanted Jesus to be the elevator. She wanted someone to carry her in different levels of transformation. But that's the overall, as far as I'm concerned, what I've learned after like 30, 40 years studying her and being with her and listening to her. You know, I'm with you. God's with you. That's all that really matters. And the truth is that you're the beloved of God. And God delights in you, loves you just the way you are. And even the imperfections that we feel we get mad by, no, that's where the light comes in. God will deal with you with your imperfection and the wounds of life. Okay? 30 minutes.